Claire Mara stepped off the plane in Ouagadougou like she belonged there. Her stride was confident, her gaze steady. She spoke flawless French, had a well-documented humanitarian record, and represented a Paris-based NGO known for supporting war-affected regions. Her ID badge gleamed under the sun. She came bearing medicine, solar-powered radios, and reassurance. To those around her, she appeared almost saintly. Within days, she was holding infants in remote, dusty villages, singing in the local Mo tongue alongside elders who watched her in disbelief. Even the typically wary and reserved soldiers began referring to her as the French woman with a Burkinabe spirit. She blended in effortlessly and was seen everywhere. Military commanders' wives served her tea. Injured officers confided in her more than they would with a chaplain. After one battalion took heavy losses near the northern border, Claire was already present, mourning with the families and comforting survivors, before even the Red Cross had arrived. Yet, behind her gentle voice, flowing scarves, and sincere smile, suspicions quietly grew. Her records stated she was born in Lyon, France, but the French embassy had no trace of her. When officials requested a background check, it came back heavily redacted and incomplete. Captain Yaro, head of Burkina Faso's domestic intelligence and a steadfast ally of President Ibrahim Traoré, started watching her movements. What he uncovered wasn't alarming in its content, but in its absence. There was no past, no traceable history. It was as if someone had completely erased her identity and replaced it with a flawless new version. Yaro placed her file on President Traoré's desk. The president said nothing, but for the first time in months he cleared his entire schedule. Claire now had his undivided attention. It all started quietly, near Arbanda. A rebel commander who had been missing for 2 years was suddenly killed in an airstrike. Claire had visited the area just days earlier, offering humanitarian aid. Shortly after, another location near Djibo was hit by a drone strike. Claire had been there as well, asking about local traditions, taking pictures, and smiling with villagers. Captain Yaro spent countless late nights reviewing activity logs, satellite imagery, and military movements. A troubling pattern began to surface. Each time Claire visited a region, a military strike or operation followed soon after. Yet, she was never caught in any danger. She was always unharmed. No breaches were found in the Army's secure communication systems, so Yaro asked himself a difficult question. What if the problem wasn't a cyber attack? What if Claire herself was the breach? She carried typical NGO equipment, a laptop, satellite phone, and a tablet. But these tools were more than capable of transmitting sensitive information without raising any red flags. She wasn't just a potential liability. She could have been the decoy, cloaked in goodwill. Yaro compiled all his findings and presented them to President Traoré. Timelines, behavior patterns, inconsistencies. The president studied the map in silence, then pointed at the next village on Claire's itinerary. In a quiet tone, he instructed, "Get surveillance from her hotel. I want to know who she contacts at night." Then came the confirmation. A convoy transporting injured soldiers was ambushed near Dori. Only 4 people had knowledge of that route. Claire had spoken to 2 of them earlier that day, asked a few friendly questions, smiled, and left the city an hour before the ambush, citing a change in plans. Hotel staff confirmed her early departure. Her driver supported her account. Yet her satellite phone had pinged just 5 kilometers from the ambush site, 15 minutes before the explosion. Yaro stood at the scene that night, surrounded by wreckage, with the air thick from diesel and blood. A young soldier's lifeless hand still gripped a radio. Yaro didn't need more evidence. He needed resolve. Claire had become the quiet constant in every unexplained incident. That evening, the president made no public statements, called no emergency meeting. No ministers were informed. Only silence. And Yaro waiting by the gate. The president emerged, his expression firm. "If she moves again," he said, "we follow." Yarrow nodded, then finally asked the question they'd both avoided. "Do you arrest her for what she's done, or for who sent her?" At Bobo Dioulasso Airport, the familiar sounds returned, vendors shouting, aid workers passing by in clean pressed clothes. Claire stood quietly, composed. Her scarf was neatly in place and her passport ready. But this time, something was different. President Traoré appeared, not at a podium or during a press briefing, but right there at the airport, in plain view of the public. He walked directly to Claire, gently took her wrist, and personally placed handcuffs on her. Cameras flashed. The crowd gasped. Claire didn't resist. Instead, she leaned in and whispered something in the president's ear. He paused, motionless for a moment. Then he slowly stepped back, his expression unreadable. Later, it was said that she had spoken a name, a mission, possibly a covert agreement between powerful global actors. But President Traoré only said this: "Some truths wear the mask of mercy, but mercy without justice is betrayal." Then he turned and walked away. The world began asking questions, but for the people of Burkina Faso, it was already clear. Real courage sometimes means knowing who not to trust, and real justice often arrives quietly, without making a sound. Later, at the airport, Claire smiled at a security guard. He waved her through without hesitation, priority clearance as always. She walked calmly, showing no sign of concern. Whether she didn't know she was being watched or simply didn't care was unclear. Two plainclothes officers followed her at a distance, blending into the crowd. Overhead, in a service corridor, Captain Yarrow observed through tinted glass, listening through an earpiece, his eyes fixed. Below, a black SUV waited. President Traoré sat inside, silent and focused. The plan was simple: no disruptions, no public confrontation. But then things shifted. Claire's bags passed inspection, until a customs officer hesitated. He reached beneath the lining and uncovered a hidden device, a satellite uplink, military-grade, encrypted, and tagged with a false branding. It was designed to look like equipment from Yan Blue, but the details were too precise, too flawless, clearly a forgery. Claire wasn't there to provide humanitarian aid, she was gathering intelligence. As Claire Mara prepared to board, Captain Yarrow's voice came through the radio clearly. "Now!" A man stepped in front of her. Another gently placed a hand on her arm. Claire did not resist. She wasn't even surprised. Slowly, she turned and locked eyes with Yarrow. "This is a mistake," she said quietly, with a hint of amusement in her tone. Then something unexpected happened. President Ibrahim Traoré exited the black SUV, walking alone. No guards, no cameras, no entourage. He crossed the tarmac by himself, heading straight toward the woman many had once praised as a saint. Claire leaned closer, her voice low. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed," she said. He froze. Her words lingered in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Then, Traoré responded in a calm but firm voice. "Bring her in alive." Claire was taken to a holding room beneath the presidential compound. She wasn't restrained, and she didn't appear worried. She asked for nothing. Not a lawyer, not water. She simply waited, silent and composed. Captain Yarrow observed her from behind one-way's glass. He could sense that the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was intentional, controlled. This woman wasn't caught off guard. It was as though she had anticipated this all along. Later, President Traoré entered alone. No press, no guards, just him and a folder. He sat down quietly. "You've been busy," he said, placing the folder on the table and opening it. Inside were photographs, burned-out military vehicles, destroyed aid stations, transcripts of intercepted messages, GPS data too precise to be coincidental. Claire looked at the images, then raised her eyes to meet his. "You know those weren't my calls," she said calmly. Then whose? He asked, keeping his voice steady. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her sleeve and slid a small envelope across the table. From behind the glass, Yarrow stiffened. You were never the real target, Claire said. You were the pawn. Traoré's jaw clenched. The realization began to set in. Claire hadn't been leaking information to France. She was investigating something deeper. He asked softly, "Why me?" "Because you're the one they didn't expect to survive," she replied. That night, President Traoré didn't sleep. He kept the envelope close and locked it in a secure box. Alone, in his office, he dismissed his aides. Then he opened a second folder, this one older, thicker, and far more troubling. The documents revealed internal memos, confidential energy contracts, and secret communications between French military officials and executives from a major oil firm based in Paris. The plan was deliberate. Keep the Sahel region unstable, fuel insurgencies just enough, and then offer military assistance in exchange for control over oil and mineral resources. The rebels were never the true enemy. They were being manipulated, used to pressure African governments into signing one-sided agreements. Claire had been sent to infiltrate, yes, but not on behalf of France. Claire had been collecting evidence. For whom, that remained unknown. A silent third party was behind it. One document stood out, a drone strike authorization, not signed by French military but by a European humanitarian official, someone President Traoré had once met and trusted during a summit in Brussels. The betrayal wasn't just about one person, it was a methodical, calculated system. Later that day, Traoré stood outside Claire's holding cell, his hand resting on the doorframe. Inside sat the woman who had deceived his country, but also offered him the means to uncover something far larger. He stepped inside. Claire showed no surprise. "You read the last page," she said. He nodded. "They're not coming to get you, are they?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "No, they're coming to silence us both." That evening, Traoré called a confidential meeting. No ministers, no media, only Colonel Fauna, Captain Yarrow, and one unidentified intelligence officer whose name was never recorded. On the table lay the envelope, next to a tablet displaying live satellite feeds, surveillance data, names and locations, a concealed network spanning West Africa. "She gave us the thread," Traoré said. "The question is, do we pull it?" The room fell silent. The evidence was clear, verified. It pointed to a disturbing conclusion. France had knowingly fueled instability, sacrificed African lives, and influenced political systems to gain control over oil and mineral reserves. Colonel Fauna slammed his palm on the table. "We go public," he said. "We tell the world the truth." But Traoré remained quiet. He wasn't focused on retaliation or optics. He was thinking strategically, how to achieve lasting impact, because real justice doesn't shout. It moves quietly, like a slow spark crawling toward a fuse. And that fuse had already been lit. By morning, Claire Morrow had disappeared. No motorcade, no escort, no flight logs, no surveillance gaps. Her cell was intact, nothing forced, nothing broken, no cameras disabled. Only a single note was found, placed neatly on the bed. 5 handwritten words. "Truth is never safe." Captain Yarrow stood in the doorway, reading the note once, then again. There was no name, no farewell, just a warning, or perhaps a legacy. News spread quickly. By afternoon, reporters were already pressing for answers. "Where is Claire Morrow?" one asked at a press conference. President Traoré didn't deflect. He didn't avoid. He met the question head-on with the same calm he had shown throughout. "She gave us the key," he said. "That's what matters. No additional details, no excuses, just a direct truth. clear and firm. Meanwhile, in Paris, government officials rushed to contain the situation. Diplomats were quietly pulled from Ouagadougou, citing security risks. Calls to the French embassy went unanswered. International aid agencies began quietly shutting their offices. The atmosphere had shifted. Claire Morrow's story wasn't just about espionage. It had become a mirror, reflecting the real cost of silence and the consequences of betrayal. International funding deals once sealed with smiles and handshakes were being reconsidered, but within Burkina Faso, something deeper was happening. In the crowded markets and narrow alleys of Ouagadougou, people weren't talking about embassies or diplomacy. They were talking about Djibo and the haunting footage showing frightened children hidden in underground bunkers. These weren't typical children. They had been trained, not with weapons, but with sorrow, taught to obey, observe, and forget, used in a quiet war, not through violence, but through grief. They also spoke of the French woman who revealed this hidden truth. She didn't take credit. She didn't ask for recognition. And more importantly, they talked about President Traoré, the leader who let truth rise above power. He didn't give grand speeches. He didn't put on a performance. He responded with calm resolve. When it mattered, he didn't hesitate. He didn't conceal. He exposed what others tried to hide beneath the guise of charity and foreign aid. In military bases, messages began to appear, scrawled on walls and mirrors. One phrase kept repeating. It wasn't a command, it was a realization, a truth discovered. In public schools, students wrote messages in red chalk across broken blackboards. They used our silence. Now we speak. This wasn't an organized protest. There were no slogans, no marches. It didn't need them. The message had already ignited. In Mali, young recruits repeated Claire's words during training. In Chad, students gathered in groups, studying the leaked documents. In Niger, women's groups lit candles and held vigils for the boys exploited in Djibo. Across West Africa, in roadside shops and local tea stalls where people once whispered about politics in fear, one question echoed again and again, not with outrage, but with curiosity. How many more truths are still hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to reveal them? Beyond Africa, global media debated how to respond. Some proposed sanctions, others pushed for diplomatic caution. Some wanted to maintain long-standing alliances. But inside Burkina Faso, the people had already moved forward. Something irreversible had begun. It wasn't about revenge, not even rebellion. It was awareness. Because once a population sees what was taken from them, their voices, their children, their land, they can't unsee it. They can't return to silence. President Traoré didn't present himself as a savior. He didn't offer salvation. What he gave them was clarity, a transparent view of truth and of those who had taken it away. In doing so, he didn't just influence the conversation, he reshaped the entire game. In Paris, French leaders struggled for the right response. In Brussels, diplomatic language abruptly changed. And in quiet European intelligence rooms, new case files were opened, clearly labeled Burkina Faso, unpredictable, Traoré, not a client. Because this time, Africa hadn't asked for permission. This time, Africa made the first move. And in the silence that followed, the world finally heard something new. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't rage. It was the steady, rising voice of dignity, returning to its feet. The note Claire had left behind read, "Truth is never safe." And perhaps that's true. But now, the people understood something just as important. Injustice isn't safe either.